Prise du débat, the Honourable Member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour to be able to rise and speak in this House on Bill C-7, an act to amend the Criminal Code regarding medical assistance in dying. Each and every time that I speak in this House, I'm reminded that the opportunity has been entrusted in me by the citizens of the North Okanagan-Shuswap, first in 2015 and again in 2019. It is roughly 5 years now since I arrived in this place for the first time, and I still remember the anticipation as I approached my work as a Member of Parliament. And I still carry great appreciation for the opportunity to serve the people of the North Okanagan-Shuswap and indeed all Canadians. Each and every member of this House has been entrusted by the constituents to represent all constituents, and this is a responsibility that I hope all members keep as a guiding principle as we undertake our work. I don't think anyone could be fully prepared for what the role of being an MP entails and the unexpected situations that arise. But I will say that I came here with an open mind, eager to listen, and committed to doing my very best to represent the constituents of the North Okanagan-Shuswap. Shortly after the 2015 election, Bill C-14, Medical Assistance in Dying, was introduced to the 42nd Parliament. In fairly short order, C-14 was debated and passed. As members will recall, C-14 was passed in response to the Supreme Court decision which ruled that adults with grievous and irremediable medical conditions are entitled to physician-assisted suicide, as it was termed at the time. Over the time that it was allotted for debate and committee study on the original C-14 legislation, I took the opportunity to hear from constituents and took what I heard at that time to form my position on the legislation at hand. Since then, I've continued to listen to constituents on all sides of this debate in an effort to ensure that I am aware of the many differing viewpoints and opinions. I have heard from many who believe in the sanctity of all human life and believe the time of life and death is to be decided by a greater power than any of us possess. I've also heard from others with various incurable health conditions who want the ability to choose an appropriate time so that they are able to pass with dignity and the ability to choose when to say a final goodbye. While listening to and pondering the various personal beliefs and scenarios shared by constituents, I've also reflected on my own personal experience and how fortunate many of us are that we have not had to make the very difficult personal decision that many Canadians face every day. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share what weighed heavily on my mind during the debate and considerations back in 2016 and remains with me today as we revisit this topic in the legislature. You see, my mother had developed dementia over a period of years before her passing. At first, we didn't recognize the symptoms, or maybe we didn't want to actually acknowledge they were there. But as time went on, Mom became more forgetful. At first, it was just that she would end up with multiple jugs of milk in the fridge, because each time she went to the grocery store, she simply remembered that she needed milk, not the fact that she had just bought some the day before. But as time progressed, her memory got worse, and eventually she moved into a full care home where she was safe and cared for. Initially, it was only her short-term memory that faded away, and she could still remember many things from her earlier life and about her family, but that gradually changed. One thing we did notice in the last few months of her life was she no longer used the telephone. It would ring, but she wasn't able to put the pieces together to pick it up and talk to whoever was calling. The phone had been a big part of her life, as she would always call all of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren on their birthdays. But for a number of months, she was no longer able to remember phone numbers or what the telephone was for or how to start a conversation. At the time of what turned out to be her last Christmas, we made plans to have her home for Christmas dinner, and we all looked forward to that day. Then on Christmas morning, we got a call from the care home and said she'd come down with the flu and would not be able to go out. We managed to get through Christmas Day, but we're concerned the illness was more than she could take in her frail condition. Well, the next day we were surprised when the care home called and said, "Your mom is doing much better today. Would you like to come down for a visit?" So we headed out knowing that mom might not be looking or feeling her best because she'd been ill. Well, we walked into the room that day and were totally taken aback. She was sitting up, fully articulate, and waiting for us. We were shocked when she started conversations like someone had turned back the clock 2 years on her dementia. She told us how she felt bad, that she'd not been able to go out and do any Christmas shopping for the grandchildren, and many other things that she'd not been able to communicate for months. When we returned home that day, our answering machine was full of messages from my 5 siblings, all wondering what was going on with Mom, because she had picked up the phone and called each of them from the numbers in her head and had extensive conversations with each of them. We were all in shock from this remarkable recovery of her memory and the restoration of her mental function from what had been something considered incurable. Unfortunately, the recovery was only temporary and only lasted about 24 hours. But nonetheless, it was a complete reversal of her dementia for that period of time. To this day, no one has been able to explain how or why this happened. We wondered at the time, and still wonder today, if there may be a cure just around the corner. Mr. Speaker, this is only one scenario, and in the time since medical assistance in dying became legal, I've heard from constituents and observed cases where family members have been quite open about their aging parents and terminally ill family member. They've been open about how, at some point, the parent or family member is no longer the person they once were, no longer wants to carry on. I've heard how they want to be able to make the choice and should not be denied that choice. So in considering the legislation before us today, we must consider all of the people and the lives that will be affected by our decision. It is a very difficult task when we are not able to hear all of the different scenarios, learn the details about the symptoms and reasons for personal choices. That is why I urge all members to consider what safeguards should be in place, and if safeguards are not in the current text of the bill, can it be amended so that our decisions respect the needs and rights of our constituents and Canadians. I will continue to open my mind and listen to what I hear from my constituents. I expect I might hear cases like mine, where we were fortunate and Mom passed peacefully in her sleep a few months later, and we didn't have to make those difficult decisions. Of cases where a cure might be found soon for someone who is uncurable today, and of cases where there is no hope for recovery, and someone wants to ensure dignity is retained. There are many other personal situations out there, and as legislators, we must remember that. We have a duty to consider more than our own personal opinions or those of those people close to us. We must be considerate of those who will be tasked with carrying out what we legislate. And we must guard against any loophole or opportunity for this legislation to be exploited and abused because we are literally legislating on matters of life and death here. Let us consider all of that in our deliberations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and